They saw her car before they saw her face. A sleek black hybrid. Clean. Quiet. Stopped properly at a red light in a near-empty downtown intersection. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Cold air. Empty sidewalks. Most of the businesses were closed, lights flickering off in rows behind dusty glass. But to the two officers parked just around the corner, none of that mattered. They were looking. Searching. Waiting for something to justify their shift. Then she turned the corner. That was all it took. Marissa Allen, 38 years old, civil rights attorney turned state judge, was driving home from a late working dinner with colleagues. No alcohol. No phone in her hand. No broken taillight. Just a woman in a navy blazer and slacks, focused on getting home after a long day of court. The moment she pulled into a quiet parking lot to reroute her GPS, the flashing lights lit up behind her. Red and blue. Blinding. Accusatory. She exhaled slowly. She had done nothing wrong. And yet, here they were. The cruiser skidded slightly as it cut her off, boxing her in. Two officers emerged fast. Their posture aggressive. One unholstering a flashlight as if approaching a robbery suspect. The other already scanning her license plate with a handheld device. She rolled down the window halfway. "Good evening, officers. Is there a problem?" "License and registration," one of them snapped, ignoring her question entirely. She moved slowly. Deliberately. "My license is in my purse on the passenger seat," she said calmly. "I'm going to reach for it now." The second officer stepped closer. "Keep your hands on the wheel." She paused, then returned her hands to the steering wheel. "I'm not resisting," she said quietly. "Just trying to comply." The officer glanced into the car. "What are you doing in this area?" Marissa tilted her head slightly. "Driving home. I work downtown." "From where exactly?" "Superior Court." He smirked. "As what, a clerk?" She looked at him. "No. As a judge." The other officer laughed under his breath. "Right." He didn't believe her. He didn't want to. "Step out of the vehicle, please," he said. "On what grounds?" "You fit the description of a suspect from earlier tonight." "What description?" "A black woman in a dark car, circling this area." Marissa took a slow breath. "So, a black woman in a car. That's the description?" The officer didn't answer. "Step out. Now. Before we continue, if you believe power doesn't come from uniforms, and that dignity should never be judged by race or clothing, take a second to subscribe. This story is one of those that exposes everything, without raising a single voice." Marissa stepped out, slowly. Cold air rushed in. She kept her hands visible. The first officer moved in behind her. "Turn around." "For what?" she asked, still calm. "Am I under arrest?" "You're being detained for suspicion of loitering and failure to comply." "I wasn't loitering. I was parked. And I asked you for clarification, which is my right." The handcuffs came out anyway. They didn't read her rights. They didn't ask another question. They just cuffed her, right there in the middle of the lot, and led her toward the squad car. She didn't argue. She didn't resist. She didn't beg. Because she knew, every second was being burned into memory. Every gesture, every smirk, every word, it would all matter later. Inside the cruiser, she sat silently as the officers chatted casually up front. "Another one playing the 'I'm somebody' card," one of them muttered. "Yeah, they always say they're lawyers or judges or whatever," the other replied, chuckling. "Until they're in a cell." She just listened. At the station, she was processed like anyone else. Mugshot. Fingerprints. Personal belongings in a plastic bin. No calls were offered. No questions answered. They asked her to remove her blazer. The cold concrete bench of the holding cell met her quietly. She sat. Back straight. Composed. The hours passed. No one came. She closed her eyes briefly, not to sleep, but to visualize the courtroom. Her courtroom. Because that's where this would end. Not in a cell. But on a bench, with her name on the wall. The next morning, the same two officers suited up and drove to court, having already submitted their report, another routine stop. Another suspicious person. Another name for the docket. They joked as they walked into the courtroom. Let's get this over with. They stood by the prosecutor's table, arms crossed, relaxed. Then the bailiff stood. All rise. They did. And when the judge walked in, they both turned. The smirk faded from one face. The breath caught in the throat of the other. There, in black robes, stepped Marissa Allen, the woman they cuffed, accused, ignored. She sat at the bench, gavel in hand, eyes steady and cold. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She simply looked at them. And in that moment, they realized. They hadn't arrested a suspect. They had arrested the judge. And she was about to deliver something they couldn't deflect. Accountability. The room was silent. Not the kind of silence you find in a library, but the kind that squeezes the air out of the room. A silence so heavy it seemed to press down on the two officers standing frozen in front of the bench. Judge Marissa Allen sat tall, her black robes flowing neatly over the polished wood. Her name was etched into the bronze plaque in front of her. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to explain anything. The moment they saw her, they knew. The same woman they cuffed. The same woman they accused. Now controlled the courtroom they were standing in. Officers, she began, her voice steady and commanding, before we proceed, I'd like to make one thing absolutely clear. Both men shifted uncomfortably. Neither could look her in the eye. You arrested me last night, she continued, without probable cause. You profiled me. You failed to read me my rights. And you filed a report filled with falsehoods. The room remained absolutely still. The attorneys at the tables sat frozen. The bailiff stood upright but glanced toward the officers, visibly stunned. One of the officers began to stammer. Your Honor, we didn't realize. She raised one hand. Stop. One word. One gesture. That was all it took to shut down whatever weak excuse was about to be delivered. You didn't realize who I was? She asked. So if I were someone else, someone without a bench, without a badge, that treatment would be acceptable? They said nothing. She looked directly at the second officer, the one who tightened the cuffs. You laughed at me. You mocked me on the drive over. You talked about how women like me always think they're somebody. She paused. Well, now you're in my courtroom. And I am somebody. A quiet gasp rippled from the gallery. She turned to the prosecutor. The charges filed by these officers, drop them. Immediately. There was no cause for arrest. The report is dishonest. And if I'm not mistaken, their body cams were conveniently not recording during the critical moments. The prosecutor nodded stiffly. Yes, Your Honor. Charges will be dropped. Marissa then turned back to the officers. As for both of you, I've already submitted a formal complaint to Internal Affairs. There will be an external investigation. Your actions were not just unprofessional, they were dangerous. Neither of the officers could speak. They stood, red-faced and exposed, no longer in control. No badge. No gun. No authority. Just uniforms, and shame. You may step out of my courtroom, she said. Now. They didn't argue. They walked out, quickly, heads down, as the entire room watched. And for the first time, justice didn't come with shouting. It came with stillness. With clarity. With power used quietly, but with precision. Marissa sat back in her chair. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She just breathed. Because what had just happened wasn't revenge. It was accountability. And it was long overdue. Later that week, one of the officers was suspended. The other was placed under formal review pending further disciplinary action. The footage from inside the station, plus the complaints filed by community members who had witnessed similar behavior, led to a broader investigation. But Marissa never gave an interview. She never posted about it. She didn't need to. Because the courtroom remembered. And so did those officers. If this story shook you, if it reminded you that power must be held accountable, no matter the uniform, then subscribe now. Backhand index pointing right. Leave a comment. Have you ever seen someone underestimated, only to rise higher than anyone expected? And always remember. The robe is just cloth. The power is in the truth. And one day, the people you try to silence might be the ones who decide your fate.